Hello everybody. So today we are going to see the Wikipedia of Isaac Newton, one of the great scientists of the century and our time, and we have studied about him in our 6, 7, 8 and even junior classes also. We have studied about Isaac Newton, and senior students of course study about Isaac Newton. So today we will see in detail the Wikipedia of Isaac Newton and see his life and learn many things from him and his family. So let's start today. So here I will type Isaac Newton Wikipedia and okay. So this is the Wikipedia site of Isaac Newton, Sir Isaac Newton. So we will start with this introduction part. Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton, 25 December 1642 to 20 March 1726, was an English mathematician, physicist, astronomer, alchemist, theologian, and author who was described in his time as a natural philosopher. He was a key figure in the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment that followed. So here we can see that Sir Isaac Newton was an English mathematician, physicist, like here we can see Albert Einstein, and astronomer, alchemist, theologian, and author who was described in his time as natural philosopher. So here we can see that he was everything: an astronomer, mathematician, physicist, alchemist, theologian, and also an author. But nowadays we have like only one stream and people can opt for only one thing, like he's an engineer, he's an architect, he's a doctor, he's a dancer, he's a singer. But in coming days we have to take everything seriously and be a unique human being, like here Sir Isaac Newton, also Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo Galilei, all were scientists, mathematicians, and also author. Everything. They were the real human being. And in today's world we have somewhere lost this ability to be a human being. We have become like robots, but with the coming of AI technology, when artificial intelligence and robots will take the place of human beings, we humans have to become once again humans. So here we can see he was a key figure in the scientific revolution, and here you can read about scientific revolution and the Enlightenment that followed. Enlightenment means also known as the Age of Reason, was an intellectual and philosophical movement that occurred in Europe. So Enlightenment happened to Lord Gautam Buddha also in India. Next we have here his pioneering book, Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica, Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy. Let's see what this book is about. So here you can see the picture of this book, and Mathematica referred to as simply the Principia. Okay, so you can read about this book in detail also. Now, first published in 1687, consolidated many previous results in established classical mechanics. Classical mechanics is one of the important topics in the world of physics. Newton also made seminal contributions to optics and shared credit with German mathematician Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz for developing infinitesimal calculus. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and here you can see the calculus. Optics shares credit. Now we will see the next paragraph. In the Principia, Newton formulated the laws of motion and universal gravitation that formed the dominant scientific viewpoint for centuries until it was superseded by the theory of relativity. Newton used his mathematical description of gravity to derive Kepler's laws of planetary motion, account for tides, the trajectories of comets, the precession of the equinoxes, and other phenomena, eradicating doubt about the solar system's heliocentricity. He demonstrated that the motion of objects on Earth and celestial bodies could be accounted for by the same principles. Newton's inference that the Earth is an oblate spheroid was later confirmed by the geodetic measurements of Maupertuis, La Condamine, and others, convicting most European scientists of the superiority of Newtonian mechanics over earlier systems. So in the Principia, Newton formulated the laws of motion. Laws of motion are three basic laws of classical mechanics that describe the relationship between the motion of an object and forces acting on it. Then an universal gravitation, which is usually stated as that every particle attracts every other particle in the universe with a force that is proportional to the product of their mass and inversely proportional to the square of the distance between their centers. So that formed the domestic scientific viewpoint for centuries until it was superseded by the theory of relativity. Theory of relativity usually encompasses two interrelated physics theories by Albert Einstein. Newton used his mathematical description of gravity to derive Kepler's law of planetary motion. So this is Kepler's law of planetary motion. Then accounts for tides and comets and position of equinoxes and other phenomena. So you can see here the position of equinoxes. What is this? Yeah, La Condamine. You can read about it by pausing the video. And next para we have here, Newton built the first practical reflecting telescope and developed a sophisticated theory of color. So Newton built the first practical reflecting telescope. So this was the first practical reflecting telescope, also known as the Newtonian telescope, and developed a sophisticated theory of color. Theory of color, yeah, based on the observation that a prism separates white light into the colors of the visible spectrum. So here you can see a prism which is separating a white light into many colors. The color of the visible spectrum. His work on light was collected in his highly influential book Optics, now published in 1704. He also formulated an empirical law of cooling, made the first theoretical calculation of the speed of sound, and introduced the notion of a Newtonian fluid. In addition to his work on calculus as a mathematician, Newton contributed to the study of power series, generalized the binomial theorem to non-integer exponents, developed a method for approximating the roots of a function, and classified most of the cubic plane curves. So you can see here the cubic plane curves. Then Newton was a fellow of Trinity College. This is the Trinity College. The second Lucasian professor of mathematics at the University of Cambridge, very famous university. He was a devout but unorthodox Christian who privately rejected the doctrine of the Trinity. He refused to take holy orders in the Church of England, unlike most members of the Cambridge faculty of the day. Beyond his work on the mathematical sciences, Newton dedicated much of his time to the study of alchemy, which is here you can see alchemy is an ancient branch of natural philosophy, a philosophical and proto-scientific tradition that was historically practiced in China, India, the Muslim world and Europe. And biblical chronology, here you can see. Now, but most of his work in those areas remained unpublished until long after his death, politically and personally tied to the Whig Party. Newton served 2 brief terms as Member of Parliament for the University of Cambridge in 1689, 1690 and 1701 to 1702. He was knighted by Queen Anne. Who is Queen Anne? So here you can see the Queen of England, Anne, 8 March 1702. Now, in 1705, he was knighted. Knighted means, here you can see, a knight is a person granted an honorary title of knighthood. So, and spent the last 3 decades of his life in London serving as warden. So this I also did not knew till now about Isaac Newton, that he served the last 3 decades of his life in London serving as warden. Interesting, huh? And master of the Royal Mint, as well as president of the Royal Royal Society, 1703 to 1727. Now we will begin with the early life of Isaac Newton. Early life. So this is the main article of early life of Isaac Newton. You can refer to if you want. Early life. Isaac Newton was born according to the Julian calendar in use in England at the time on Christmas Day, 25 December 1642, 4 January 1643 at Woolsthorpe Manor. Here you can see in Woolsthorpe by Collinsworth, you can see Colsterworth, a hamlet in the in a county of Lincolnshire. His father, also named Isaac Newton, had died 3 months before. Born prematurely, Newton was a small child, his mother Hannah Iskoff reportedly said that he could have fit inside a quart mug. So he was so small when he was born because he was born prematurely. Then, when Newton was 3, his mother remarried and went to live with her new husband, the Reverend Barnabas Smith, leaving her son in the care of his maternal grandmother, Marguerite Iskoff. Newton disliked his stepfather and maintained some enmity towards his mother for marrying him, as revealed by his entry in a list of sins committed up to the age of 19, threatening my father and mother Smith to burn them and the house over them. Newton's mother had 3 children, Mary, Benjamin, and Hannah, from her second marriage. So here you can see that Newton had other brothers and sisters after her mother had marriage once again with his stepfather. Now, the King's School. From the age of about 12 until he was 17, Newton was educated at the King's School in Grantham. You can see the King's School is a British grammar school with academy status. And Grantham is a market and industrial town in the South Kelstovin district. Now, we can see that this school taught Latin and ancient Greek and probably imparted a significant foundation of mathematics. He was removed from school and returned to Woolsthorpe by Colesworth by October 1659. His mother, widowed for the second time, attempted to make him a farmer, an occupation he hated. Henry Stokes, master at the King's School, persuaded his mother to send him back to school, motivated partly by a desire for revenge against a schoolyard bully. He became the top-ranked student, distinguishing himself mainly by building sundials and models of windmills. Here you can see what is sundial. So in this paragraph we can see that he studied in this school, the King's School in Grantham. But his mother wanted to make him a farmer. But he did not want to be a farmer. If we go back to that time, like we have here the thinking pattern of the people of that time were very, you can say, security type and very like they were not ready to accept things. They were happy with what they had. They did not want to take risks. So here I think his mother thought like this only and wanted to make him a farmer instead of giving him the support to do more in his studies. But we will see many things what happened after that in the University of Cambridge. So what happened in the University of Cambridge is that in June 1661, Newton was admitted to Trinity College in the University of Cambridge. Trinity College, this is the Trinity College. It's a constituent college of the University of Cambridge, founded in 1546 by King Henry VIII. Now, his uncle, Reverend William Escoff, who had studied at Cambridge, recommended him to the university. At Cambridge, Newton started as a subsizar. What is subsizar? Subsizar. a Trinity College, Dublin, and the University of Cambridge. Cesar is an undergraduate who receives some form of assistance such as meals, lower fees, or lodging during his or her period of study, in some cases in return for doing a defined job. Here you can see the passion of Isaac Newton to study, to know more in spite of all the difficulties, without the support of his parents and mother. Especially mothers are very close to children, and if mothers only don't support them, what you can think. So here we can see what subsidizer was, and paying his way by performing valet duties until he was awarded a scholarship in 1664. One thing I want to say that it becomes very difficult when you work and study, very very difficult. The one who do this only know what it is. Valet. What is valet? A valet or varlet is a male servant who serves as personal attendant to his employer. So in the Middle Ages and ancient regime, valet de camera was a role for junior courtiers and specialists such as artists in a royal court, but the term valet by itself most often refers to a normal servant. Now duties, so he performed this valet duties until he was awarded a scholarship in 1664, which covered his university costs for 4 more years until the completion of his MA. This is MA, Masters of Arts. At the time, Cambridge teachings were based on those Aristotle, this is Aristotle, whom Newton read along with then more modern philosophers including Descartes, René Descartes, and astronomers such as Galileo Galilei and Thomas Street. He set down in his notebook a series of questionnaires about medical philosophy as he found it. In 1665, he discovered the generalized binomial theorem. What is this binomial theorem? In elementary algebra, the binomial theorem describes the algebraic expansion of powers of a binomial. So you can read about this in detail if you want. And began to develop a mathematical theory that became later what? Calculus. Soon after, Newton obtained his BA degree at Cambridge in August 1665. The university temporarily closed as a precaution against the Great Plague. This is the Great Plague of London. Now, although he had been undistinguished as a Cambridge student, Newton's private studies at his home in Woolsthorpe over the next 2 years saw the development of his theories on calculus, optics, and the law of gravitation. Now, in April 1667, Newton returned to the University of Cambridge, and in October he was elected as a Fellow of Trinity. Fellows were required to be ordained as priests, although this was not enforced in the Restoration years, and an assertion of conformity to the Church of England. This is the Church of England, established Christian church in England, was sufficient. However, by 1675 the issue could not be avoided, and by then these unconventional views stood in the way. Nevertheless, Newton managed to avoid it by means of special permission from Charles II. This is Charles II, King of Scotland. His academic work impressed the Lucasian professor Isaac Barrow. This is Isaac Barrow, and Lucasian professor, you can read about this. Who was the Lucasian professor? Isaac Barrow at that time, who was anxious to develop his own religious and administrative potential. He became master of Trinity College 2 years later. In 1669, Newton succeeded him. Only 1 year after receiving his MA, Newton was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society in 1672. Now this was his early life, and now from here we will start his midlife. Calculus. Newton's work has been said to distinctly advance every branch of mathematics then studied. His work on the subject, usually referred to as fluxions, or calculus, fluxions, XIUNS, or calculus. If you know the pronunciation of this word, please comment in the comment section right now. If you know the pronunciation of this word, I love to hear from you. Now, seen in a manuscript of October 1666, is now published among Newton's mathematical papers. His work De Analysis per Equationis Numero Terminorum Infinitas, sent by Isaac Barrow. He is Isaac Barrow, a Christian theologian. Then to John Collins. John Collins in June 1669 was identified by Barrow in a letter sent to Collins that August as the work of an extraordinary genius and proficiency in these things. Now, Newton later became involved in a dispute with Leibniz over priority in the development of calculus. The Leibniz-Newton calculus controversy. Most modern historians believe that Newton and Leibniz developed calculus independently, although with very different mathematical notations. Leibniz notation and the differential method, nowadays recognized as much more convenient notations, were adopted by continental European mathematicians, and after 1820 or so on, also by British mathematicians. His work extensively uses calculus in a geometric form based on limiting values of the ratios of vanishingly small quantities in the Principia itself. Newton gave demonstration of this under the name of the method of first and last ratios, and explained why he put his expositions in this form, remarking also that hereby the same thing is performed as by the method of indivisibles. Because of this, the Principia has been called a book dense with the theory and application of the infinitesimal calculus. In modern times and in Newton's time, nearly all of it is of this calculus. His use of methods involving one or more orders of the infinitesimally small is present in his De Motu Corporum in Garum of 1684 and in his papers on motion during the 2 decades preceding 1684. Newton has been reluctant to publish his calculus because he feared controversy and criticism. He was close to the Swiss mathematician Nicolas Fetio de Duelier. This is Nicolas Fetio de Duelier. In 1691, Duelier started to write a new version of Newton's Principia and corresponded with Leibniz. In 1693, the relationship between Duelier and Newton deteriorated and the book was never completed. Starting in 1699, other members of the Royal Society accused Leibniz of plagiarism. The dispute then broke out in full force in 1711, when the Royal Society proclaimed in a study that it was Newton who was the true discoverer and labeled Leibniz a fraud. It was later found that Newton wrote the study's concluding remarks on Leibniz. Thus began the bitter controversy which made the lives of both Newton and Leibniz until the latter's death in 1716. Now, Newton is generally credited with the generalized binomial theorem, valid for any exponent. He discovered Newton's identities, Newton's methods, classified cubic plane curves, binomials of degree 3 in 2 variables, made substantial contributions to the theory of finite differences, and was the first to use fractional indices and to employ coordinate geometry to derive solutions to Diophantine equations. He approximated partial sums of the harmonic series by logarithms, a precursor to Euler's summation formula, and was the first to use power series with confidence and to revert power series. Newton's work on infinite series was inspired by Simon Stevens' decimals. When Newton received his MA and became a Fellow of the College of the Holy and Undivided Trinity in 1667, he made the commitment that I will either set theology as the object of my studies and will take holy orders when the time prescribed by these statutes 7 years arrives. Now, or I will resign from the college. Up until this point, he had not thought much about religion and had twice signed his agreement to the 39 Articles, the basis of Church of England doctrine. He was appointed Lucasian Professor of Mathematics in 1669 on Burroughs' recommendation. During that time, any fellow of a college at Cambridge or Oxford was required to take holy orders. Holy orders, what is holy orders? In certain Christian denominations, holy orders are the ordained ministers of bishop, priest and deacon. Like it is one of the sacraments, holy orders. Like there is sacrament of reconciliation, means the sacrament of Holy Eucharist. There are 7 sacraments. If you want to know in detail about these sacraments, you can just search on Google. Let me just search here. You can search on Google, or you can use Chat GPT. Now I have not opened Chat GPT, so I have just opened and Googled what are seven sacraments. So seven sacraments are, first is baptism, cleansing the soul. Eucharist or communion means they give the body of Christ in the form of bread to eat, and the blood of Christ in the form of wine. Confirmation, an outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Reconciliation or confession of sins means to accept your sins by confessing it. And anointing of the sick, then marriage, then holy orders. So here we are talking about holy orders. And became an ordained Anglican priest. So we can see Newton also became a priest, Anglican priest. However, the terms of the Lucasian professorship required that the holder not be active in the church, presumably so as to have more time for science. Newton argued that this should exempt him from the ordination requirement, and Charles II, whose permission was needed, accepted this argument. Thus, a conflict between Newton's religious views and Anglican orthodoxy was averted. Now we come to optics. In 1666, Newton observed that the spectrum of colors exiting a prism, here you can see this prism, in the position of minimum deviation is oblong, even when the light ray entering the prism is circular, which is to say the prism refracts different colors by different angles. This led him to conclude that color is a property intrinsic to light, a point which had until then been a matter of debate. From 1670 to 1672, Newton lectured on optics. During this period, he investigated the refraction of light, demonstrating that the multicolored image produced by a prism, which he named as spectrum, could be recomposed into white light as a lens and a second prism. Modern scholarship has revealed that Newton's analysis and resynthesis of white light owes a debt to corpuscular alchemy. What is this corpuscularism? It is a set of theories that explain natural transformations as a result of the interaction of particles. Now, he showed that colored light does not change its properties by separating out a colored beam and shining it on various objects, and that regardless of whether reflected, scattered, or transmitted, the light remains the same color. Thus, he observed that color is the result of objects interacting with already colored light rather than objects generating the color themselves. This is known as Newton's theory of color. From this work, he concluded that the lens of any refracting telescope would suffer from the dispersion of light into colors, chromatic aberration. As a proof of the concept, he constructed a telescope using reflective mirrors instead of lenses as the objective to bypass that problem. Building the design, the first known functional reflecting telescope, today known as Newtonian telescope, here you can see Newtonian telescope, involved solving the problem of a suitable mirror material and shaping technique. Newton ground his own mirrors out of custom composition of highly reflective speculum metal using Newton's rings. to judge the quality of the optics for his telescopes. In late 1668, he was able to produce this first reflecting telescope. It was about 8 inches long and it gave a clearer and larger image. In 1671, the Royal Society asked for a demonstration of his reflecting telescope. Their interest encouraged him to publish his notes of colors, which he later expanded into the work Optics. This was his book Optics. When Robert Hooke criticized some of Newton's ideas, Newton was so offended that he withdrew from public debate. Newton and Hooke had brief exchanges in 1679 to 80, when Hooke appointed to manage the Royal Society's correspondence, opened up a correspondence intended to elicit contributions from Newton to Royal Society transactions, which had the effect of stimulating Newton to work out a proof that the elliptical form of planetary orbits would result from a centripetal force inversely proportional to the square of the radius vectrum, but the two men remained generally on poor terms until Hooke's death. So here we can see there were some arguments between Hooke and Newton. Then Newton argued that light is composed of particles of corpuscles which were refracted by accelerating into a denser medium. He verged on sound-like waves to explain the repeated pattern of reflection and transmission by thin films. Optics, BK2, Probs 12. But still retained his theory of fits that dispose corpuscles to be reflected or transmitted. Now, however, later physicists favored a purely wave-like explanation of light to account for the interference patterns and the general phenomenon of diffraction. What is diffraction? Diffraction is the interference or bending of waves around the corner of an obstacle or through an aperture into the region of geometrical shadow of the obstacle or aperture. Now, today's quantum mechanics, protons, and the ideas of wave-particle duality bear only a minor resemblance of Newton's understanding of light. Wave-particle duality is the concept in quantum mechanics that every particle or quantum entity wherever we may be described as either a particle or a wave. Someday we will do a detailed Wikipedia study about quantum mechanics. Here it is, quantum mechanics. One day we will do. If you want the video, you can just comment in the comment section and I will surely try to put up the video. But now let's focus on Isaac Newton, his work and the great things he has done. In his Hypothesis of Light of 1675, Newton posited the existence of the ether to transmit forces between particles. The contact with the Cambridge Platonist philosopher Henry More revived his interest in alchemy. He replaced the ether with occult forces based on Hermetic ideas of attraction and repulsion between particles. What is Hermetic? Hermetism is a philosophical and religious system based on the purported teachings of Hermes Trismegistus. Augustus. John Maynard Keynes was an English economist and philosopher whose ideas fundamentally changed the theory and practice of macroeconomics and the economic policies of government. Yeah, I have heard about John Maynard Keynes in my economics lecture, who acquired many of Newton's writings on alchemy. Stated that Newton was not the first of the age of reason, he was the last of the magicians. Newton's contributions to science cannot be isolated from his interest in alchemy. This was at a time when there was no clear distinction between alchemy and science, and had he not relied on this occult idea of action at a distance across a vacuum, he might not have developed his theory of gravity. So there was not a clear distinction between science and alchemy. In 1704, Newton published Optics, in which he expounded his corpuscular theory of light. He considered light to be made up of extremely subtle corpuscles, that ordinary matter was made of grosser corpuscles, and speculated that through a kind of alchemical transmutation are not gross bodies and light convertible into one another, and may not bodies receive much of their activity from the particles of light which enter their composition. Newton also constructed a primitive form of frictional electrostatic generator using a glass globe. Here you can see electrostatic generator. Wow, an electrostatic generator or electrostatic machine is an electrical generator that produces static electricity or electricity at high voltage and low continuous current. So this is, I think, a project this is a project. You can see electrostatic generator. Wow, I said wow because it is a project, and in many universities they give students such kind of projects, and yeah, I like. In his book Optics, Newton was the first to show a diagram using a prism as a beam expander, and also the use of multiple prism arrays. Some 270. What is an arrays? Arrays is like a container, okay, to store variables. Some 278 years after Newton's discussion, multiple prism beam expanders, what it is, became central to the development of narrow line width tunable lasers. Also, the use of these prismatic beam expanders led to the multiple prism dispersion theory. Subsequent to Newton, much has been amended. Young and Fresnel discarded Newton's particle theory in favor of Huygens wave theory to show that color is the visible manifestation of light's wavelength. Who is Fresnel? He is Fresnel, Augustin Jean Fresnel, and Huygens. Now, science also slowly came to realize the difference between perception of color and mathematicable optics. The German poet and scientist Goethe could not shake the Newtonian foundation, but one hole Goethe did find in Newton's armor. Newton had committed himself to the doctrine that refraction without color was impossible. He therefore thought that the object glasses of telescopes must forever remain imperfect. Achromatism and refraction being incompatible. This interference was proved by Daunt to be wrong. Daunt. Who is Daunt? John Daunt, English optician. Now we come to gravity. We have here that in 1679 Newton returned to his work on celestial mathematics by considering gravitation and its effect on the optics of planets with a reference to Kepler's law of planetary motion. This followed stimulation by a brief exchange of letters in 1679 to 80 with Hooke, who had been appointed to manage the Royal Society's correspondence and who opened a correspondence intended to elicit contributions from Newton to Royal Society transactions. Newton's reawakening interest in astronomical matters received further stimulus by the appearance of a comet in the winter of 1680 to 1681, on which he corresponded with John Flamsteed. After the exchanges with Hooke, Newton worked out a proof that the elliptical form of planetary orbits would result from a centripetal force inversely proportional to the square of the radius vector. Newton communicated his results to Edmond Halley and to Royal Society in De Motu Corporum in Gyrone, a tract written on about 9 sheets which was copied into the Royal Society's register book in December 1684. This tract contained the nucleus that Newton developed and expanded to form the Principia. Who is Edmond Halley? He is Edmond Halley, astronomer mathematician. The Principia was published on 5th July 1687 with encouragement and financial help from Halley. This is Halley. In this work, Newton stated the 3 universal laws of motion. What are they? Now, together these laws describe the relationship between any object, the forces acting upon it, and the resulting motion, laying the foundation of classical mechanics. They contributed to many advances during the Industrial Revolution, which soon followed and were not improved upon for more than 200 years. Many of these advances continue to be the underpinnings of non-relativistic technologies in the modern world. He used the Latin word gravitas, means weight, for the effect that would become known as gravity, and defined the law of universal gravitation. Now, in the same work, Newton presented a calculus-like method of geometrical analysis using first and last ratios, gave the first analytical determination based on Boyle's law of the speed of sound in air, interpreted the oblateness of Earth's spheroidal figure, accounted for the precession of the equinoxes as a result of the moon's gravitation, attraction on the Earth's oblateness, initiated the gravitational study of the irregularities in the motion of the moon, provided a theory for the determination of the orbits of comets, and much more. Newton's biographer David Brewster reported that the complexity of applying his theory of gravity to the motion of the moon was so great it affected Newton's health. He was deprived of his appetite and sleep during his work on the problem in 1692 to 93, and told the astronomer John Mackin that his head never ached but when he was studying the subject. A According to Brewster, Edmund Halley also told John who is this? John Conduit of Cranberry Park, Hampshire, that when pressed to complete his analysis, Newton always replied that it made his head ache and kept him awake so often that he would think of it no more. Emphasis in original. Newton made clear his heliocentric view of the solar system. This is heliocentrism is the astronomical model in which the Earth and planets revolve around the Sun at the center of the universe. Now, heliocentric view of the solar system developed in a somewhat modern way because already in the mid 1680s he recognized the deviation of the Sun from the center of gravity of the solar system. Center of the gravity of the solar system. For Newton, it was not precisely the center of the Sun or any other body that could be considered at rest, but rather the common center of gravity of the Earth. The Sun and all the planets is to be esteemed the center of the world, and this center of gravity either is at rest or moves uniformly forward in a right line. Newton adopted the at-rest alternative in view of common consent that the center, wherever it was at rest. Newton's postulate was an invisible force able to act over vast distances, led to him being criticized for introducing occult agencies. Occult in the bronze is the category of astronomic supernatural beliefs and practices, superstitious beliefs into science. Later, in the second edition of the Principia 1713, Newton firmly rejected such criticisms in a concluding general scholium, writing that it was enough that the phenomena implied a gravitational attraction, as they did, but they did not so far indicate its cause, and it was both unnecessary and improper to frame hypotheses of things that were not implied by the phenomena. Here Newton used what became his famous expression, hypothesis non fingo. With the Principia, Newton became internationally recognized. He acquired a circle of admirers, including the Swiss-born mathematician Nicolas Fréteau-de In 1710, Newton found 72 of the 78 species of cubic curves and categorized them into 4 types. In 1717, and probably with Newton's help, James Stirling proved that every cubic was one of these 4 types. Newton also claimed that the 4 types could be obtained by plane projection. Here you can see plane projection from one of them, and this was proved in 1731, 4 years after his death. Later life. Now we will see later life. Royal Mint in the 1690s, Newton wrote a number of religious tracts dealing with the literal and symbolic interpretation of the Bible. A manuscript Newton sent to John Locke, in which he disputed the fidelity of 1 John chapter 5 verse 7. The Johannine comma is an interpolated phrase in verse 5 to 7, and its fidelity to the original manuscripts of the New Testament renamed unpublished remained unpublished until 1785. Newton was also a member of the Parliament of England for Cambridge University in 1689 and 1701, but according to some accounts, his only comments were to complain about a cold draught in the chamber and request that the window be closed. He was, however, noted by Cambridge diarist Abraham de la Palme to have rebuked students who were frightening locals by claiming that a house was haunted. Newton moved to London to take up the post of Warden of the Royal Mint in 1696, a position that he had obtained through the patronage of Charles Montagu, first Earl of Halifax, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. He took charge of England's great reckoning, trod on the toes of Lord Lucas, Governor of the Tower, and secured the job of Deputy Comptroller of the temporary Chester branch for Edmund Halley. Newton became perhaps the best known master of the mint upon the death of Thomas Neale in 1699, a position Newton held for the last 30 years of his life. These appointments were intended as sinecures, but Newton took them seriously. He retired from his Cambridge duties in 1701 and exercised his authority, reformed the currency, and punished clippers and counterfeiters. As warden and afterwards as master of the Royal Mint, Newton estimated that 20% of the coins taken in during the Great Recoinage of 1696 were counterfeit. Counterfeiting was high treason. Punishable by the felon being hanged, drowned, and quartered. Despite this, convicting even the most flagrant criminals would be extremely difficult, but Newton proved equal to the task. Now we will see the last paragraph of this later life. Distinguished as a habitué of bars and taverns, he gathered much of that evidence himself, for all the barriers placed to prosecution and separating the branches of government. English law still had ancient and formidable customs of authority. Newton had himself made a justice of the peace in all the home counties. A draft letter regarding the matter is included in Newton's personal first edition of Philosophiae Naturalis. Witnesses, informers, and suspects between June 1698 and Christmas 1699. Newton successfully prosecuted 28 coiners. Newton was made president of the Royal Society in 1703 and an associate of the French academic sciences. In his position of the Royal Society, Newton made an enemy of John Flamsteed, the Astronomer Royal, by prematurely publishing Flamsteed's Historia Coelestis Britannica, which Newton had used in his studies. Let's see if they have given the picture of Royal Society. Yeah, this is the symbol, you can say the logo of Royal Society. And what is this? The French Academy of Sciences. Yeah, this is the French Academy of Sciences. Now we will see the knighthood. In April 1705, Queen Anne knighted Newton during a royal visit to Trinity College, Cambridge. The knighthood is likely to have been motivated by political considerations connected with the parliamentary election in May 1705, rather than any recognition of Newton's scientific work or services as master of the mint. Newton was the second scientist to be knighted after Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon. As a result of a report written by Newton on 21st September 1717 to the Lords Commissioners of His Majesty's Treasury, the bimetallic relationship between gold coins and silver coins was charged by royal proclamation on 22nd December 1717, forbidding the exchange of gold guineas for more than 21 silver shillings. Now, this inadvertently resulted in a silver shortage, as silver coins were used to pay for imports, while exports were paid for in gold, effectively moving Britain from the silver standard to its first gold standard. It is a matter of debate as to whether he intended to do this or not. It has been argued that Newton conceived of his work at the mint as a continuation of his alchemical work. Newton was invested in the South Sea Company and lost some 20,000 euro or 4.4 million in 4.4 million in 2020, which is this 20,000 euro is 4.4 million euro as per 2020, if it is compared to today's worth. Now, when it collapsed in around 1720, so it collapsed in around 1720. Toward the end of his life, Newton took up residence at Cranberry Park near Winchester with his niece and her husband until his death. His half-niece, Catherine Barton, served as his hostess in social affairs at his house on Jermyn Street. What is this? Jermyn Street in London. He was her very loving uncle, according to his letter to her when he was recovering from smallpox. Death. Newton died in his sleep in London on 20th March 1727. OS. What is this OS? A date, a calendar. 20 March 1726. And in NS, 31st March 1727. This is NS. Old style and new style. He was given a ceremonial funeral attended by noble scientists and philosophers, and was buried in Westminster's Abbey among kings and queens. So here you can see he was buried among kings and queens in Westminster Abbey. Yeah, so beautiful the church is. I've not gone anywhere except my country, but someday God wish we can go and have a look. If you have gone here, you can comment in the comment section. Among kings and queens, he is also the first scientist to be buried in the abbey. Voltaire may have been present at his funeral. Voltaire. A bachelor, he had divested much of his estate to relatives during his past years and died intestate. Here it is written intestate and here it is written intestacy. His papers went to John Conduit and Catherine Barton, no picture. John Conduit, no picture. After his death, Newton's hair was examined and found to contain mercury. Mercury is a chemical element, I know, but how the hair had contained mercury? Probably resulting from his alchemical pursuits. Mercury poisoning could explain Newton's eccentricity in late life. Now we will look at his personality. Although it was claimed that he was once engaged, Newton never married. The French writer and philosopher Voltaire, who was in London at the time of Newton's funeral, said that he was never sensible to any passion, was not subject to the common frailties of mankind, nor had any commerce with women, a circumstance which was assured me by the physician and surgeon who attended him in his last moments. There exists a widespread belief that Newton died a virgin. Maybe. And writers as diverse as mathematician Charles Hutton, economist John Maynard Keynes, and physicist Carl Sagan, each have commented on it. Newton had a close friendship with the Swiss mathematician Nicolas Fetiot de Meuler, who he met in London around 1689. Some of their correspondence has survived. The relationship came to an abrupt and explained end in 1693, and at the same time Newton suffered a nervous breakdown, which included sending wild accusatory letters to his friends Samuel Pepys and John Locke. His note to the letter included the charge that Locke endeavored to embroil me with women. Newton was relatively modest about his achievements, writing in a letter to Robert Hooke in February 1676, if I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants. Two writers think that the sentence, written at a time when Newton and Hooke were in dispute over optical discoveries, was an oblique attack on Hooke, said to have been short and hunchbacked rather than or in addition to a statement of modesty. On the other hand, the widely known proverb about standing on the shoulders of giants, published among others by 17th century poet George Herbert, a former orator of the University of Cambridge and fellow of Trinity College, in his Jacula Prudentum 1651 had as its main point that a dwarf on a giant's shoulders sees further of the two, and so its effect as an analogy would place Newton himself rather than Hooke as the dwarf. In a later memorial, Newton wrote, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." In 2015, Stephen Weinberg, a Nobel laureate in physics, called Newton a nasty antagonist and a bad man to have as an enemy, noting Newton's attitude towards Robert Hooke and Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz. Now we will see theology. Theology, religious views. Although born into an Anglican family, by his 30s, Newton held a Christian faith that, had it been made public, would not have been considered orthodox by mainstream Christianity, with one historian labeling him a heretic. By 1672, he had started to record his theological researches in notebooks, which he showed to no one and which have only recently been examined. They demonstrate an extensive knowledge of early church writings and show that in the conflict between Athanasius and Arius, which defined the creed, he took the side of Arius, the loser, who rejected the conventional view of the Trinity. Newton recognized Christ as a divine mediator between God and man, who was subordinate to the Father who created him. He was especially interested in prophecy, but for him the great apostasy was Trinitarianism. Now here Trinity means God, Holy Spirit and Christ are one. The Father, Son and the Holy Spirit is one. All. One God, three revelation. Now early church. Here you can see the early church or Paleo-Christianity. Then Athanasius. What is Athanasius? He was Athanasius I of Alexandria. Arius. Yeah. Then Newton tried Newton tried unsuccessfully to obtain one of the two fellowships that exempted the holder from the ordination requirement. At the last moment in 1675, he received a dispensation from the government that excused him and all future holders of the Lucasian chair. In Newton's eyes, worshipping Christ as God was idolatry. To him, the fundamental sin. In 1999, historian Stephen D. Snobelin no photo is given. Wrote, Isaac Newton was a heretic, but he never made a public declaration of his private faith, which the Orthodox would have deemed extremely radical. He hid his faith so well that scholars are still unraveling his personal beliefs. Snoebelen concludes that Newton was at least a Socinian sympathizer. He owned and had thoroughly read at least 8 Socinian books, possibly an Arian and almost certainly an anti-Trinitarian. Although the laws of motion and universal gravitation became Newton's best known discoveries, he warned against using them to view the universe as a mere machine, as if akin to a great clock. He said, so then gravity may put the planets into motion, but without the divine power it could never put them into such a circulating motion as they have about the sun. Along with his scientific fame, Newton's studies of the Bible and of the early church fathers were also noteworthy. Newton wrote works on textual criticism, most notably an historical account of 2 notable corruptions of scripture and observations upon the prophecies of Daniel and the Apocalypse of Saint John. He placed the crucifixion of Jesus Christ at 3 April AD 33, which agrees with one traditionally accepted date. He believed in a rationally immanent world, but he rejected the Hylozorism implicit in Leibniz and Baruch Spinoza. The ordered and dynamically informed universe could be understood and must be understood by an active reason. In his correspondence, Newton claimed that in writing the Principia, I had an eye upon such principles as might work with considering men for the belief of a deity. He saw evidence of design in the system of the world, such a wonderful uniformity in the planetary system must be allowed the effect of choice. But Newton insisted that divine intervention would eventually be required to reform the system due to the slow growth of instabilities. For this, Leibniz lampooned him. God Almighty wants to wind up his watch from time to time, otherwise it would cease to move. He had not, it seemed, sufficient foresight to make it a perpetual motion. Newton's position was vigorously defended by his follower Samuel Clarke in a famous correspondence. Samuel Clarke, a century later, Pierre-Simon Laplace were celestial mechanics has a natural explanation for why the planet orbits do not require periodic divine intervention. The contrast between Laplace's mechanistic world view and Newton's one is the most strident, considering the famous answer which the French scientist gave Napoleon, who had criticized him for the absence of the creator in the Mécanique Céleste. Serre I omi passer di kete hypothese. Napoleon. Who is Napoleon? Sir, I didn't need this hypothesis. This is Napoleon. It's loading. And scholars long debated whether Newton disputed the doctrine of the Trinity. His first biographer, David Brewster, who compiled his manuscripts, interpreted Newton as questioning the veracity of some passages used to support the Trinity, but never denying the doctrine of the Trinity as such. The 20th century encrypted manuscripts written by Newton and bought by John Maynard Keynes. Among other, were deciphered, and it became known that Newton did indeed reject Trinitarianism. Deciphered. Religious thought. Newton and Robert Boyle approach to the mechanical philosophy was promoted by rationalist pamphleteers as a viable alternative to the fantasists and enthusiasts, and was accepted hesitantly by orthodox preachers as well as dissident preachers like the latitudinarians. The clarity and simplicity of science was seen as a way to combat the emotional and metaphysical superlatives of both superstitious enthusiasm and the threat of atheism. And at the same time, the second wave of English deists used Newton's discoveries to demonstrate the possibility of a natural religion. The attacks made against pre-Enlightenment magical thinking and the mystical elements of Christianity were given their foundation with Boyle's mechanical conception of the universe. Newton gave Boyle's ideas their completion through mathematical proofs, and perhaps more importantly was very successful in popularizing them. Alchemy. Of an estimated 10 billion words of writing in Newton's papers, about 1 million deal with alchemy. Many of Newton's writings on alchemy are copies of other manuscripts with his own annotations. Alchemical texts mix artisanal knowledge with philosophical speculation, often hidden behind layers of wordplay, allegory, and imagery to protect craft secrets. Some of the content contained in Newton's papers could have been considered heretical by the Church. In 1888, after spending 16 years cataloguing Newton's papers, Cambridge University kept a small number and returned the rest to the Earl of Portsmouth. In 1936, a descendant offered the papers for sale at Sotheby's. The collection was broken up and sold for a total of about €9,000. John Maynard Keynes was one of about 3 dozen bidders who obtained part of the collection of auction. Keynes went on to resemble an estimated half of Newton's collection of papers, on alchemy before donating his collection to Cambridge University in 1946. All of Newton's known writings on alchemy are currently being put online in a project undertaken by Indiana University. It is a system of public university in the US state of Indiana. The chemistry of Isaac Newton and summarized in a book. Newton's fundamental contributions to science include the quantification of gravitational attraction, the discovery that white light is actually a mixture of immutable spectral colors, and the formulation of the calculus. Yet there is another more mysterious side to Newton that is imperfectly known, a realm of activities that spanned more 30 years of his life. Although he kept it largely hidden from his contemporaries and colleagues, we refer to Newton's involvement in the discipline of alchemy, or as it was often called in 17th century England, chemistry. In June 2020, two unpublished pages of Newton's notes on Jean-Baptiste van Helmont's book on plague de peste were being auctioned online by Bonhams. Newton's analysis of this book, which he made in Cambridge while protecting himself from London's 1665 to 1666 infection, is the most substantial written statement he is known to have made about the plague. According to Bonhams, as far as the therapy is concerned, Newton writes that the best is a toad suspended by the legs in a chimney for 3 days, which at least vomited up earth with various insects in it onto a dish of yellow wax, and shortly after died. Combining powdered toad with the excretions and serum made into lozenges and worn out the affected area, drove away the contagion and drew out the poison. Legacy. Here we will see first the fame of Isaac Newton. The mathematician Joseph Louis Lagrange said that Newton was the greatest genius who ever lived, and once added that Newton was also the most fortunate, for we cannot find more than once a system of the world to establish. English poet Alexander Pope wrote the famous epitaph. What is this? Epitaph is a short text honoring a deceased person. Nature and nature's laws by hid in night, God said, let Newton be, and all was light. But this was not allowed to be inscribed in the monument. The epitaph in the monument is as follows: H.S.E. Isaacus Newton, Equus Horatus. So this is written in some other language. If you want, you can pause the video and read it if you want. Then which can be translated as follows: here is buried Isaac Newton, knight, who by a strength of mind almost divine and mathematical principles peculiarly his own, explored the course and figures of the planets, the paths of comets, the tides of the sea, the dissimilarities in rays of light, and what no other scholar had previously imagined, the properties of the colors thus produced. Diligent, sagacious, and faithful in his expositions of nature, antiquity, and the Holy Scriptures, he vindicated by his philosophy the majesty of God, might, and good, and expressed the simplicity of the gospel in his manners. Mortals rejoice that there has existed such and so great an ornament of the human race. He was born on 25th December 1642 and died on 20th March 1726. In a 2005 survey of members of Britain's Royal Society, formerly headed by Newton, asking who had the greater effect of the history of science, Newton or Albert Einstein, the members deemed Newton to have made the greater overall contribution. In 1999, an opinion poll of 100 of the day's leading physicists voted Einstein the greatest physicist ever, with Newton the runner-up, while a parallel survey of rank and file physicists by the site Physics Web gave the top spot to Newton. Einstein kept a picture of Newton on his study wall alongside ones of Michael Faraday and James Clerk Maxwell. The SI derived unit of force is named the Newton in his honor. Now, Woolstrophy Manor is Grade 1 listed building by Historic England through being his birthplace and where he discovered gravity and developed his theories regarding the refraction of light. In 1816, a tooth said to have belonged to Newton was sold for €730 US dollar. It's $3,633 in London to an aristocrat who had it set in a ring. Guinness World Records 2002 classified it as the most valuable tooth, which would value approximately €25,000 or $35,700 in US. In late 2001, who brought it and who currently has it has not been disclosed. Apple incident. Newton himself often told the story that he was inspired to formulate his theory of gravity by watching the fall of an apple from a tree. The story is believed to have passed into popular knowledge after being related by Catherine Barton. Catherine Barton, Newton's niece to Voltaire. Voltaire then wrote in his essay on epic poetry 1727, Sir Isaac Newton walking in his gardens had the first thought of his system of gravitation upon seeing an apple falling from a tree. Although it has been said that the apple story is a myth and that he did not arrive at his theory of gravity at any single moment. Acquaintances of Newton such as William Stukeley, whose manuscript account of 1752 has been made available by the Royal Society, do in fact confirm the incident, though not the apocryphal version that the apple actually hit Newton's head. Stukeley recorded in his memoirs of Sir Isaac Newton's life a conversation with Newton in Kensington on 15th April 1726. We went into the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees, only he and myself, amidst other discourse. He told me he was just in the same situation as when formerly the notion of gravitation came into his mind. Why should that apple always descend perpendicularly to the ground? Though he to himself, occasioned by the fall of an apple as he sat in a contemplative mood, why should it not go sideways or upwards, but constantly to the earth's center? Assuredly, the reason is that the earth draws it. There must be a drawing power in matter, and the sum of the drawing power in the matter of the earth must be in the earth's center, not in any side of the earth. Therefore, does the apple fall perpendicularly or upward the center, matter thus draws matter. It must be in proportion of its quantity. Therefore, the apple draws the earth, as well as the earth draws the apple. John Conduit, Newton's assistant at the Royal Mint and husband of Newton's niece, also described the event when he wrote about Newton's life. In the year 1666, he retired again from Cambridge to his mother in Lincolnshire, whilst he was pensively meandering in a garden. It came into his thought that the power of gravity, which brought an apple from a tree to the ground, was not limited to a certain distance from earth, but that his power must extend much further than was usually thought. Why not as high as the moon, said he to himself, and if so, that must influence her motion and perhaps retain her in her orbit. Whereupon he fell a calculating what would be the effect of that supposition. It is known from his textbooks that Newton was grappling in the late 1660s with the idea that terrestrial gravity extends in an inverse square proportion to the moon. However, it took him 2 decades to develop the full-fledged theory. The question was not whether gravity existed, but whether it extended so far from Earth that it could also be the force holding the moon moon to its orbit. Newton showed that if the force decreased as the inverse square of the distance, one could indeed calculate the moon's orbital period and get good agreement. He guessed the same force was responsible for other orbital motions, and hence named it universal gravitation. Various trees are claimed to be the apple tree, which Newton describes. The King's School, Grantham, claims that the tree was purchased by the school, uprooted and transported to the headmaster's garden some years later. The staff of the now means National Trust owned Woolstrophe Manor dispute this and claim that a tree present in the gardens is the one described by Newton. A descendant of the original tree can be seen growing outside the main gate of Trinity College, Cambridge, below the room Newton lived in when he studied there. The National Fruit Collection at Brockdale in Kent. Brockdale, can supply grafts from the tree, which appears identical to Flower of Kent, a coarse-fleshed cooking variety. Now this is the commemorations of Newton. Newton's commemorations. Newton's monument 1731 can be seen in Westminster Abbey, at the north of the entrance of the choir, against the choir screen, near his tomb. It was executed by the sculptor Michael Risborough, 1694 to 1770, in white and grey marble, with design by the architect William Kent. The monument features a figure of Newton reclining on top of a sarcophagus, his right elbow resting on several of his great books, and his left hand pointing to a scroll with a mathematical design. Above him is a pyramid and a celestial globe showing the signs of the zodiac and the path of the comet of 1680. A relief panel depicts putti. What is putti? Putti using instruments such as a telescope and prism. The Latin inscription of the base translates as, Here is buried Isaac Newton, knight who by a strength of mind almost divine and mathematical principles peculiarly his own, explored the course and figures of the planets, the paths of comets, the tides of the sea, the dissimilarities in rays of light, and what no other scholar has previously imagined. The properties of the colored thus produced diligent, sagacious, and faithful in his expositions of nature, antiquity, and the Holy Scriptures. He vindicated by his philosophy the majesty of God, mighty and good, and expressed the simplicity of the gospel in his manners. Mortals rejoice that there has existed such and so great an ornament of the human race. He was born on 25th December 1642 and died on 20th March 1726 or 27. Translation from G. L. Smith, The Monuments and Gunnel of St. Paul's Cathedral and of Westminster Abbey. Here you can see a picture of Newton's statue on a display at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. And from 1978 until 1988, an image of Newton designed by Harry Ecclestone appeared on Series D, Euro 1 banknotes issued by the Bank of England, the last €1 notes to be issued by the Bank of England. Newton was shown on the reverse of the notes holding a book and accompanied by a telescope, a prism, and a map of the solar system. A statue of Isaac Newton looking at an apple at his feet can be seen at the Oxford University Museum of Natural History. A large bronze statue, Newton after William Blake by Eduardo Paolozzi, dated 1995 and inspired by Blake etching, dominates the piazza of the British Library in London. British Library, wow. A bronze statue of Newton was erected in 1858 in the center of Grantham, where he went to school, prominently standing in front of Grantham Guide Hall. This is Grantham Guide Hall. The still surviving farmhouse at Woolsthorpe by Colsterworth in a Grade 1 listed building by historic England through being his birthplace, and where he discovered gravity and developed his theories regarding the refraction of light. The Enlightenment. Enlightenment philosophers chose a short history of scientific predecessors, Galileo, Boyle, and Newton principally, as the guides and guarantors of their applications of the singular concept of nature and natural law to every physical and social field of the day. In this respect, the lessons of history and the social structures built upon it could be discarded. It is held by European philosophers of the Enlightenment and by historians of the Enlightenment that Newton's publication of the Principia was a turning point in the scientific revolution and started the Enlightenment. It was Newton's conception of the universe based upon naturally and rationally understandable laws that became one of the seeds for Enlightenment ideology. Locke and Voltaire applied concepts of natural law of political systems, advocating instinct rights. The physiocrats and Adam Smith applied natural conceptions of psychology and self-interest to economic systems, and sociologists criticized the current social orders for trying to fit history into natural models of progress. Monboddo and Samuel Clarke resisted elements of Newton's work but eventually rationalized it to conform. Monboddo and Samuel Clarke resisted elements of Newton's work but eventually rationalized it to conform with their strong religious views of nature. So here we end with the Wikipedia and works and biography of Sir Isaac Newton. Here you can see some works of Newton published in his lifetime if you want to. So thank you for listening to this video, and bye bye.